Reconvene the special meeting of September 12, 2012. Roll call.
The record will reflect that all members of council are present.
Closed session report.
There's no closed session report this evening.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Councilman Rosansky.
Please join me in the pledge to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Notice to the public.
The city provides a yellow sign-in card to assist in the preparation of the minutes. The completion of the card is not required in order to address the council. Speakers must limit comments to 5 minutes on agenda items. The council has the discretion to extend or shorten the time limit on agenda or non-agenda items. As a courtesy, please turn cell phones off or set them in the silent mode. Now is the time for public comments, and public comments are invited on non-agenda items generally considered to be within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Speakers must limit comments to 3 minutes. Before speaking, please state your name for the record.
Are there any public comments on non-agenda items? All right, seeing none. Our current business, the rental rates for commercial marinas over city-managed tidelands. Now, let me be clear. This is not about residential piers. This is not about fuel docks. This is not about restaurants with tidelands. What am I missing? Yeah, this is strictly about commercial marinas. So when we do have a discussion, that will be what the discussion should be about, and not about other topics which we will discuss in the future, but not this evening. I would like to turn it over to a member of our subcommittee to lay out the way they would like to see the evening proceed. Who's speaking?
Okay, thank you, Mayor Gardner. First off, I'd like to get an idea about how many people would want to make comments on this subject when we get to public comment. If you can just show of hands here, how many people do we think? Okay, that's quite a few, but not extraordinary. Is there any interest on the part of council to limit the time for public comment in view of the number of people?
Really, it didn't look like that many to me.
I don't know, it looked like about 25, 30 to me. I'd say 5 minutes for the first hour and 3 minutes after that.
Wait, we can't do that, can we?
Yeah, you need to give everybody the same amount of time to speak.
All right, then I say 3 minutes.
What's the wish of the council?
3 minutes, 3 minutes.
What did we do for the equestrians last night? There must have been 20 of them.
5 minutes.
I'd be more inclined to go with 5.
But. Straw vote, 5, 3? 3. All right, 3 minutes. And also what we'll do is we'll have you stack up a bit so we keep it moving. All right, go ahead,
Okay,
Councilman Hinn.
all right. Well then, with that small change, what we would like to do is move forward right away with a staff presentation on this subject. And during and after that staff presentation, council will ask questions and get clarification on any items that it feels need clarifying. And then after that, we'll open it up for public comment. And I'd suggest that, as was mentioned a second ago, in view of the number of people, it's probably just as well to line up or at least be ready and queued when it's your turn to do it, just to move through efficiently. Once we're done with the public comment, included in the public comment, we have allowed for up to 15 minutes for a representative of the marina owners, Gary McKittrick, I believe, to make a presentation, he and an associate of his. And so we will give the two of them that extra time, a total of 15 minutes. Otherwise, speakers will be limited to 3 minutes on their comments. Once we close public comment, then we'll bring it back to council for additional discussion and action. So that's the way we want to proceed, and I hope that's clear for everybody.
All right, thank you.
Okay?
One thing, let's be polite, courteous to each other. No applause we don't want this to be a cheering competition or anything. That way we will have a congenial discussion as we try to reach a decision on this issue. All right, staff?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. My name is Dave Kiff. I'm the city manager. I'm going to run through this presentation. with you. So maybe a few more lights off. So as the mayor noted, I want to make it clear that,
Just a second.
Okay.
There are some seats down here in front, over here.
yeah, please fill in.
Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
So as the mayor noted, I wanted to make sure that folks in the audience and at home know that this meeting was not about a number of things, including rents for gas docks, shipyard docks, HOA docks, sport fishing, charters, yacht clubs, guest docks, and residential piers. But it is about setting rates for commercial marinas that rent slips. That's the purpose of this meeting. That's the way the staff report is set up. So what I'll cover in this presentation is a reminder of the city's obligation, a little background about the committee that has worked on this. This is a committee of council members, how the proposals have changed over time, as well as outline some of the research and stakeholder outreach that's been conducted to get to this point. And then I'm going to summarize the committee's recommendation. And then there have been other proposals mentioned. They're in the staff report. I may not go over them tonight unless asked with questions. And then it comes back after public comment to the council for direction or action. So a reminder of what the city's obligation is, and that's to charge fair market value for the use of tidelands. And a number of reasons why these are not the city's lands, these are the state's lands. They're assigned to us. The State Lands Commission grants them to us via legislation, and it goes back to 1978. It's been amended many times. They're subject to what's called the public trust doctrine, and generally, if the city doesn't manage these fairly and appropriately and according to the trust doctrine, that grant can be revoked. In addition to this, not managing them correctly and charging fair market value is, we believe, a gift of public funds, and that's clearly prohibited by the California Constitution. I'm going to jump to the committee's background and role. This is a subcommittee, actually, of the council called the Committee on Harbor Charges. It was formed over 2 years ago. The members are Councilmember Selich, Councilmember Henn, and Councilmember Rosansky. They were asked and tasked to examine harbor fees related to cost of service, like processing a permit, onshore and offshore mooring rents, the rents at the Balboa Yacht Basin, that's not just slips, that's apartments and garages, commercial marinas, and other commercial uses. So I'm going to tell you kind of where we are today. The slide changes to show that in November 2010, we finished the fees based on cost of service. November 2010, also the onshore and offshore mooring rents. Balboa Yacht Basin the next month in December 10. And then commercial marinas are under review now. And there are appraisals underway of those other uses. But again, that's not something we'll be presenting tonight because we don't have the data. Not under this committee's purview are residential piers. This committee has not been assigned the work to do that. So a little bit about commercial uses in the harbor. There are about 65 different permittees, and they're on year-to-year permits. And they're generally renewed each year, but they are single-year permits. There are several others on leases, good examples of those, the Balboa Bay Club, Bahia Corinthian, the American Legion, and then not just, this isn't a city lease, but the county also has tidelands, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's going to come up. So there's 2 marinas on county leases, and those are by Bay Shores and the Newport Marina, otherwise known as Swales, very close to Bay Shores. But the commercial pier permit uses that I noted include, again, large and some small commercial marinas, restaurant, guest docks, shipyard docks, gas docks, yacht clubs, etc. The rent for these permits is now 36 cents per square foot of tidelands rented. So the process that the committee has gone through to get to this point is to review things like our municipal code, our council policies, the Beacon Bay bill that I mentioned, the Tidelands Trust, the past and recent practices of the city, the county, the State Lands Commission, existing city and county leases and permits, and known appraisals. We also brought on board 2 special consultants, legal counsel, and a firm with an expertise in tidelands leasing practices. The committee came forth with an initial proposal, and then they met with the largest stakeholders about it, a number of people in this room. That proposal was 20% of gross slip revenue for these commercial marinas and $1.20 square foot base rent. And that those permits, those that were not on leases, would move to leases. After that, they revised the proposal. They met with the stakeholders again. They authorized the conducting and updating of 2 appraisals, one by Jim Netzer, one by Gary Rasmussen. And there were 2 public workshops with those appraisers. And then the proposal has been revised, and you'll hear more about that today. So just a quick reminder of what that guidance is in the Muni Code. There's at least 2 sites in the Muni Code. That's a Muni Code citation talking about commercial uses of public tidelands should be reflective of fair market value related to an appraisal. And that rent should be, again, there's another section, rent should be based upon fair market value, but as determined by the City Council, and that determination shall be based upon the findings of an appraiser. And then in our council policies, wherever a lease is considered, an analysis shall be done, and that analysis shall be conducted using appraisals or other techniques to determine, among other things, the highest value of the property. So when you wrap that up, this is a city attorney's advice that the Muni Code and the policies direct that fair market rent is required and appropriate for commercial pier uses. This value can be set by the council at any amount, provided the amount is based on an appraisal and other techniques and it is reflective of fair market value. I'm going to flash through a couple of quick slides. This is kind of the timing. It started way back in February 23rd, the initial stakeholder meeting. A couple of our council members on the committee have been out to make presentations. The next closest thing, at least to the council, the appraisals were done, and the draft recommendation was posted at the end of last month on our website. The council last talked about this as far back as March, and then here we are tonight. So I'm going to talk about how the proposal from the committee has changed over time. The original lease proposal was a term of 5 to 30 years. There was an option to renew with an option fee. There was percentage rent at 20%. There was base rent at $1.20 or 75% of percentage rent. There was a participation rent if there was sale or refinancing that would come to the city. There was a capital improvement set aside of 4%. So this next slide shows how that's been changed. The term that's being discussed now is anywhere from 10 to 25 years. The option to renew, I think, will still be discussed in the future. The percentage rent is still 20% of gross slip rental revenue. After the appraisals came back, the base rent suggested $1.45, but this would be phased in over 3 years. It would be updated every 5 years. The committee is recommending taking out any reference to an option fee, to participation rent, or to a capital improvement set aside. I'm going to talk next about the appraisal results. We've got 2 appraisals, one by Jim Netzer, one by Gary Rasmussen. The appraisal results, the data value is roughly mid-August of this year. In percentage rent, the appraisal, I'm going to, again, speak to commercial marinas. So we're talking about, that was all that has been appraised. And 25% of gross slip revenue when the tidelands are joined to the uplands. In other words, when potentially the city owns both the uplands and the tidelands. In many cases in the harbor we don't. We just control the tidelands. And in that case, where they're not joined, it should be 20% of gross slip revenue. And the base rent should be $1.45 a square foot. Mr. Rasmussen came up with a slightly different conclusion. He suggested that indeed the 25% where there is joinder, tidelands and uplands, but 17% of gross slip revenue where the tidelands are separate from the uplands. And base rent, he had a little variation. He had a large marina base rent at $1.50 a square foot and a smaller marina base rent at $1.40 a square foot. So those are the 2 appraisals that the committee has looked at the most.
Dave, can you clarify something? The appraiser is saying that it's either 25% of the revenue or the $1.45 a square foot, or both? What is
they would be
the appraiser
combined.
saying?
You would pay whatever is larger, and the base rent is actually not intended in the appraisals, as I understand it, to mirror percentage rent. It's supposed to kind of follow it and catch up to it over time. Stay as something slightly below percentage rent, but the leases should be structured so that whatever number is higher should be the amount paid. Just as how this compares, there's a number of leases in the harbor, and I think one key thing to remember here is that there's two different classes here. There are tidelands joined to uplands and tidelands separate from uplands. So what I did was kind of summarized a ranking anywhere from the 40% that the American Legion pays with joinder to the Balboa Bay Club, that's a lease, the Newport Dunes. Then you get into the ranges where the tidelands are separate. You'll see the appraisals. You'll see a 2006 appraisal. You'll see what Bayshores and the Newport Marina pay, and those are 20% and a 20% equivalent. And then you'll see Mr. Rasmussen's appraisals, and then coming all the way down to 9% at the Bahia Corinthian Yacht Club. So now to the committee's recommendations. The rent should be based on a percentage of gross slip revenue with a base rent per square foot. There should be a move from permits to leases. The leases, there should be a basic template lease, and the lease term should be between 10 and 25 years, but not more than the usable life of that improvement. In other words, of the quality of the docks. If they need to be able to not deteriorate before the end of the improvement of the lease. Here's more specifically about rent for commercial marinas. The committee recommended a percentage rent of 20% with a base rent of $1.45 square foot, whichever is higher. It would be phased in over 3 years. You see, this is our current rate. It would go to 75 cents, then $1.15, then $1.45. At the same time, the percentage rent also would be phased in from 10% to 15% to 20%. So as noted in the staff report, there have been other proposals submitted by the stakeholders group, and I think the committee has appreciated that willingness to look at the different proposals, and they have looked at them closely. We've had some even as late as Friday. Some are summarized in the staff report, but I'll turn this back to the committee and the council now after summarizing basically the suggested action today.
All right. Are there any questions for staff at this point? All right. Seeing none, who is going to present for the they want to go at the end?
Yeah, I think Gary McKittrick wanted to go toward the end of the public comment period. Is that right, Gary? So we're happy to invite public comment from anyone that wishes to make a comment.
Thank you. I'll take it over. You will get 3 minutes, as we've decided, and what I will do is I will stop you at 3 minutes. You understand why we have to do this? Because otherwise, if we start to give somebody 30 more seconds, then we have to give everybody 30 more seconds, and we're off our patterns here. So please begin, and please line up so that as soon as one person is finished, we can go on to the next person. And give your name as you come up.
I'm Ted Robinson. My wife and I own 50% of the Larson Marina, and we also have a house on Lido Isle with a dock. My partner and I built the buildings along Larson about 33 years ago, and that's where we've had our real estate headquarters since then. In fact, when we opened that Larson's, when we bought Larson's, the city council asked us if we could save the shipyard, and we said we would try because it was closing at the time. We put in $100,000 or $200,000 to restructure it and talk to Al Larson to come back in and take it in. But last year, as I recall, well, as all of you recall, they reported the shipyard was going to be closing for good, and that turned out not to be true. I put in another $30,000, and then talked to Abe Hara, who's probably the best shipwright in the area, into taking it over, and it's running okay now. But now I understand this is aside from what you're talking about tonight slightly, but the city has plans to tax his slips and his percentage of gross somewhere down the line, and shipyard business is pretty tentative to start with, and therefore I expect that this will be the final blow, and that'll eliminate the shipyard. I can't fight City Hall anymore, so I'm giving up. I've been a developer for about 50 years, and I've appeared in front of hundreds of councils, boards, associations, et cetera, and a lot of the things that been suggested to me have been counterintuitive and project-destroying suggestions, and now I'm almost 80, and I figure that the bureaucracies have done just about everything they can possibly do to me. But then along comes this, which is a municipal income tax, and not on the net, but on the gross. My God, that translates into about, I don't know what it is, 40-50% of the actual net in a lot of cases. And if you have a loan, it's going to be turned upside down. This to me is absolute madness. I don't care what you say, it's madness. There's going to be a great upheaval about this. It's as if the work and expenses and the premium prices we paid to put in our project never existed. And this will increase my own shipyard leases, if we can pass it on, to about $3.40 per lineal foot. And we're the lowest rents in the harbor. Imagine what the others are going to be. And that $3.40 then gets added to the gross. And then that's added 20%, et cetera, ad absurdum. Now, the state, as I was pointed out, the state granted the Tidelands to Newport Beach with the admonition to manage, quote, appropriately and fairly. Now, you have to decide whether that means that the people get to use the water to engender a robust boating community, or does it mean that it's for the city council to maximize the revenue to the city council or to the city hall?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, please.
Mayor Gardner, I would like to at least make one point of clarification here. I gained the impression from the speaker's comments that he was thinking that this charge that we're talking about, which is rent for the use of the tidelands that the docks cover, that somehow this charge would be applicable to the business that is operating, that is the shipyard business. In other words, there would be a charge of 20% against the revenue of the shipyard business. That is not the case. This is a charge that is related strictly to the marina for the footprint of water that the docks cover.
All right.
And further, it relates to marinas that are basically leasing slips for boats to lease a slip. It has, I'm not exactly familiar with Larson's operation, whether he's leasing slips or just using the slips in conjunction with the boatyard. If that's the case, it's a different story, and it won't apply to what we're talking about tonight.
I'm sorry, sir, you have had your... No.
No.
Public, who is next, please? Can we have...
Mayor Gardner, if I may
Yes.
make one point, what he may be referring to is a pass-through cost, and although his business wouldn't pay the bill to the city, whoever he has that subletting from, there could be a cost.
Okay, well, are we through with public comment then? I'm going to say this once again. Would you please come to the, if you're going to speak, start moving forward so we do not have long lapses between people who are commenting.
You can line up behind him.
Go ahead, please.
All right, great. Thank you. My name is Matt Claybaugh. I have property in Babel Island, but the reason I'm coming up here to speak is that my business is generally in golf courses. And we have developed municipal golf courses all across California. We've seen huge mistakes being made by cities doing exactly what's being espoused here. We're just going to charge a piece of the gross. The golf course is very similar to the commercial marina in that it's a very unique piece of property. When you talk about appraisals, there's no appraisal that really can say this marina is worth this amount. You look at the numbers that you have up here, you've got 40% being charged to the American Legion, you've got 9% on the other side. Clearly, there's issues there that an appraisal can't take into effect. I guess all I'm saying is that when you charge a gross amount and you try and get as much as you're trying to get here, you're going to find some horribly unintended consequences 5-10 years down the road, as we've seen with golf courses decimating cities. Since I only have 5 minutes or 3 minutes, I think that will conclude what I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Council. I'm Glenn Highland. I'm the Rear Commodore at Balboa Yacht Club and 30-year resident of Corona del Mar. The club is the operator of a very large marina adjacent to our facility on Bayside Drive, and the club's been in the harbor since 1922. We have 750 members. We have 2,500 in our expanded family, and we have more than 100 days of activities on the water from sailboats, racing, fishing, and cruising. We have not recovered from the 2008 downturn. The club, as you'd expect, experienced the recession with levels of membership being a challenge, and then for the first time in our history, we saw significant increases in the marina vacancies. We then, on top of that, had the change in the city mooring fees, which again, for the first time, generated vacancies in our mooring field. We have seen, for the first time, that our club members are leaving the city and going to other harbors not too far away because they can rent similar facilities, similar slips, for a fraction of the cost of Newport Beach. And during this period, during this downturn, the clubs acted very responsible. We built and we maintain all of our uplands facilities. We are responsible residents and keep them up. The members have been asked to subsidize the downturn that's happened in the marina. And now we're faced with a dramatic change in the fees. And we don't feel that the council has looked at the economic consequences that are going to happen, not just to the marine industry, which is very fragile, but to the broader economic community, including the yacht clubs. Our concern is that they look at this and think about the unintended consequences, because we just don't see how you can increase these fees in an already vacant situation and not make a bad situation worse. We'd like to make sure that as the process unfolds and it touches all the tideland users in the harbor, that it's done in a way that's thoughtful and appropriate for the use of the tidelands. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hello, my name is Peter Swift, and I live in Newport, and I fix the docks. So I have two projects that were on track to be done, and now they're not. So one of the unintended things that are going to come about is the marinas are not going to be worked on. And they're going to be blighted. They're already blighted marinas, and there's just not, maybe it's an excuse, but to take that extra hit from them, that's their maintenance money. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
I'm Seymour Beek. I live on Balboa Island. My message is pretty simple. The council has flexibility in determining the fair market value and must consider the appraisals. But it appears to me the staff report has gone right to the top end of the range with its recommendation. It's gone for the high end. And I think that's too striking and too dramatic and too much. And as the previous speaker pointed out, I don't think the consequences have been totally explored or are totally known. So I think you should back off from the numbers in the staff report.
Thank you. Next, please. Come on, let's move forward so we can keep this moving.
Good evening. Jim Walker. I'm president of the Newport Beach Restaurant Association and operate a restaurant in Corona Del Mar. My concern is looking at this, the economic impact it's going to have on our city. The harbor is really the identity of this town. It creates the draw, it creates the tourism, and it creates the activity, which as a ripple effect, no pun intended, but as a ripple effect, obviously it affects our restaurants, it affects our hotels, it affects the whole tourism. Based on what I know and what I'm hearing from this proposal, is that's a pretty dramatic increase to take at this time, particularly, and to reflect what was said. You know, I haven't recovered from 2008 or 2009. I think that's true of a lot of businesses here, not only in Newport Beach, but throughout the country. And I think we need to take some very careful steps here, because I don't want to see this harbor not need the dredging anymore, because the only thing that's going to be out there are going to be paddle boards and paddle kayaks. I'm concerned that this measure, even though I understand the necessity, I understand what's going on within the harbor, but to me it could possibly be looked at in a more global view. Is there some way perhaps to spread this cost throughout the residents, or to create a temporary sales tax so that everybody within Newport Harbor, I mean, frankly, if you have a view and you're a resident and you look at the harbor, that view and that property value has gone up because of the harbor. And I think it's a little I don't want to say unfair, but for lack of a better word, unfair to put the onus of the harbor and the expenses on approximately 65 businesses, none of which we want to go out of business. So I would encourage you to take another look at this, to, as Seymour said, step back and maybe, even though you're spreading this out, but at the end of 2015, that's a pretty big increase. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hi, my name's Gary Hill. I own a marine fuel dock on the water. When I started there in the 60s, there were 7 fuel docks in the harbor. Now we're down to 3. It really seems like you guys are trying to move that down to possibly 1. It is really tough. We've got a number of boats that right now are leaving Newport and fueling in San Pedro or San Diego. We are trying to hold that in. This extra cost is going to be really tough for all of us. On another note, if I fuel a boat and it comes from a marina and they're a whale watch group and they're paying this, is that not double taxation? That does not make sense to me. You guys are talking about taxing them twice. The staff keeps referring to the Tidelands as a gift. According to my rent to my landlord, that does not seem like a gift. My rent is very high. I pay huge numbers because I am on the water, just like people that own an oceanfront house that pay huge numbers because they're on the beach. This is not a gift. We pay plenty for this. So I don't know how the staff keeps referring to this as a gift, the Tidelands. The last time I remembered, the coastal land use policy is to support and encourage marine businesses. This new lease is not supporting any of our marine businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
I'll just note while you're coming up that this discussion tonight does not cover fuel docks. And I appreciate your comments and hope to see you back next time when we discuss that.
You can't divide and conquer like you did on the mooring.
Thank you.
Jet Rudder. I'm just an old resident since 1939, and it's the 20%. I've been involved with business from time to time, and when somebody says we're going to tax 20% of the gross on a going business that's already having enough trouble in the middle of the Great Recession, I think, gosh, they're trying to put them out of business. Do we really want to put these people out of business? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please. Come on. Can we keep moving down, please? I'm not sure I can say anything else about it.
My name is John Vallely. I own a couple of commercial marinas. I was looking over the NetSur appraisal in Section D. It says the submerged tidelands in Newport Harbor that are not leased in conjunction with the adjoining upland parcel for marina purposes have a minimum fair market rent of $1.45 a square foot of tidelands against 20% of the gross revenue from slip rental fees. 3 paragraphs later, in regard to Dave Kiff's fair market value, it says, from Netsur's appraisal, the submerged tidelands in Newport Harbor that are leased for short-term uses, 90 days or less for marine-oriented business, shipyards, yacht brokerage, in conjunction with the adjoining upland parcel, have a fair market rent of 99 cents per square foot of tidelands against 4% of the gross revenue from short-term slip rental rates. Why would we pay more? Recently, the city gave a plaque to one of its distinguished citizens, Duffy Duffield of the Electric Boat Company. This award was for all the work he had put forth in with his fellow harbor commissioners to develop the harbor area management plan. Duffy told me he felt very uncomfortable receiving this plaque because he could not think of one recommendation that he or his colleagues made that had been enacted by this city council or its city manager. He said this to me. Duffy, at his own expense, studied and traveled to other harbors to find the best way to manage Newport Harbor. He cares deeply, as do the harbor commissioners, about the success of Newport Harbor. All the harbor commission recommendations ignored by the city council and the city manager. He also said this, quote, He believed that every city decision made for draconian increases of Tidelands fees would probably cause one or more of his own businesses to fail. Another quote, "Why would I want a plaque from the city when they are running my small businesses off the waterfront? Perhaps in a few years, the small business owners will give to the city council and its city manager a new plaque. It will say this: the largest money grab. Thanks for all your efforts to run small businesses off the waterfront and Newport Harbor." Is that the legacy you folks want? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Good evening, Council. I'm Robert Lounsbury of Waterfront Newport Beach, and I'm here to explain the following facts and positions as they relate to the September 4th, 2012 letter and the new George Jones appraisal I previously submitted to you last week. The 2901 waterfront docks are the city's only self-contained charter vessel base with complete support services and ample sufficient parking. This facility and its uses have contributed substantial direct and secondary economic benefits to this city for nearly 3 decades now, with the potential to increase these benefits if upgraded and operated under the proposed plans for a new marina. Over the past 2 years, Waterfront has worked closely with Harbor Resources, other city departments, Coastal Commission, and other agencies to obtain approval for the new marina. Waterfront has received all agency approvals and was very close to obtaining city permits in early 2012. In February 2012, we were first informed about the proposed tax increase. In particular, the proposed percentage method will kill this marina project. After reviewing the revised city purchased appraisals and the new July 2012 George Jones appraisal, we believe that a strong case can be made for a base rental rate of $1.20 per square foot, but not for a percentage of gross fee basis, especially where extensive upfront capital costs and limits on gross revenues from only 3 vessel berths are involved. Separately, many speakers bring up the joinder issue. The NETSR appraisal has 13 comps. However, 11 of the 13 comps do not have joinder and thus are not comparables. The other 2 of 13 are swales and bayshore, both which are not joinder comparables as discussed in detail on page 57 to 59 of the Jones appraisal. Therefore, the NETSR appraisal basically has no comparables for properties with joinders and cannot be relied upon at all for Newport Harbor properties. We have agreed to much higher square footage-based rents, whether it be $1.20, $1.50, $1.75, or some other number. These numbers will already raise almost $2 million extra for the city. In return, all we ask is to be allowed to make our business decisions without the city auditing us, second-guessing us, suing us over our business decisions, and or taking our business away from us altogether. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Next, please.
I'm Brian Williams. I've lived here in the city about 30 years. I have a home down in Dover Shores. The last 25 years, trying to find a place to put my boats, it's always been full. I don't know if you guys are aware, but there's a lot of docks for rent, and the prices have gone almost half what they were, if you can even find anybody to rent your slip. And this is just insanity. I don't think it's a money-raising problem. I think it's a spending problem. The same thing is going on with the country. You can raise more money and spend more money, and you get the same problem. Everybody's leaving Newport. These guys that have been talking are right. I don't know if you have boats or if you're out on the water, but the people that are leaving, I've talked to them, and a lot of them are going to Huntington Beach, Long Beach. The fees up there to rent their boats are half. What I'm worried about is if you're raising all these fees and getting my boats worked on, it's already very expensive. Half the stuff you see in Newport's an illusion. These Ferraris, Pat down at Ferrari, I've talked to him. I figured, you see these Ferraris? Great. These guys must be millionaires coming here. They're not. They're broke. Everything's financed and leased. I have a sneaky suspicion that half these boat people are the same way. I think we have some heavy hitters here in Newport and a lot of wealthy people. I bet more than half of them are broke. You do this, and you're going to run them out of town is what you're going to do. And if you do that, I guess there's 2 ways of looking at it. It's kind of what's going on with the government, United States of America. You can raise all the taxes and kill all the jobs, or you can lower it and bring more boats in here and keep the thing running. But the city's beautiful. It is. And I love living here, and I love the city, and I love the people here. But I think you're making a big mistake.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Hi, my name's William Dutton. I moved here in 1965 with my family, and I've seen Newport Beach change quite drastically over however long that is. And I'm here tonight not because I own a business in the Tidelands, but because I'd like to ask the City Council to not make the same mistake I've made. I am a commercial real estate developer. I own about 2 million square feet of real estate, and I've gone in and looked at properties and said, can I raise the rates there? Bought those properties, chased out the local businesses that were there for a long time, that were part of the communities that those properties were in. Signed deals with national tenants thinking, hey, I've increased the value of my real estate, thinking that I've made the properties better. Well, a lot of those national tenants are out of business now. I've got a lot of big boxes that are empty. And that's really kind of, bringing it back down here, that's really what the potential of raising the rents 4 times, almost 4 times, 3.5 times in the next 3 years. Right now, the shock that you'll see, and I think a few people have talked about unintended consequences, you're going to get them. You may not be in those seats, maybe the next city council that actually has to deal with that. But this is kind of a big issue for you guys. It seems like it should be, hey, fair market rents. We've got these appraisers telling us this is what we could be charging. That's not the reality. The reality is, right now, the businesses that are here, a lot of them are failing. Some of them are doing okay. Maybe 1 or 2 are doing great. But the fact of the matter is, none of them can handle a 3.5 times rental increase. So please don't make the same mistake I've done. Think about the unintended consequences. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there any more public comment?
Boy, talk about keeping your mouth shut. I should not share so much. Deputy Duffield, Newport Beach. Sorry.
Now we know why you weren't here to collect your
He's a
plaque.
UCLA guy. I'm an SC guy. I'm talking about the slips that I rent, and I'm assuming it has, unless you're giving them for free, because I'm a boat service yard, I rent a lot of slips. So I'm assuming I'm falling under this category of a marina. I'm not talking about my rental business. I'm talking about service or sales. So I'm a tenant, obviously, on the bay, and I'm in 2 commercial marinas. This increase in fees will adversely affect my business. I will be forced to pass on the added cost to my customer, making the public who owns the Tidelands pay more than it is necessary to use the land they own. This situation simply does not make common sense. The general plan and the HAMP documents clearly spell out the importance of encouraging, supporting, and promoting businesses along the waterfront. These increases we are seeing with the moorings, city docks, and now marinas do nothing to encourage, support, or promote commerce on the bay. More than one council member has informed me that the Tidelands monies has nothing to do with running the harbor. Nothing. If these fees are not connected to the bay, then what are they paying for? We all recognize costs have gone up, and so the fees must go up, but it must be economically reasonable to sustain the businesses. This increase is way beyond reasonable. Fair market value is the new mantra of some on this council. May I suggest that the city's employees whose salaries are attached to the Tidelands also be fair market value, because what I see they make, it is certainly not reasonable that we can sustain paying people to do work with salaries that are over market. Or maybe our workers are guaranteed a job for life and we cannot look at doing things for less costs. Maybe that's where we've evolved to. Then I say this money grab from waterfront Tidelands user will eventually have no effect anyway, as salaries and pensions will just keep going up and up. After 22 years, I finally have an opportunity to upgrade the property my business is on, as the owner recognizes me as a good investment. This project would amount to spending millions of dollars and would be a wonderful addition to Mariners Mile. I've run the numbers, and if this tax goes through as proposed, the added cost will tip the scales, making my project economically unreasonable or too risky. I know of a well-known established marine supplier that has plans to build a huge flagship store in our city with the possibility of their customer base being affected by this 20% proposal. The project is being reconsidered. And don't forget, marine businesses are very weather dependent. This was a sunny summer, whereas last summer was gloomy. My business was off 30% difference in revenue. Beyond that, the issue, the short seasons boating enjoys, I've got to survive the winter doing a fraction of the business I was doing in the summer. That's
Thank you.
just the way it is.
Thank you very much. Next, please.
Good evening. My name is Dave New. I'm president of Basin Marine in Newport Beach. I was born and raised here in Newport. I'm 63 years old, and I was born and raised at the Balboa Yacht Basin, where my father started the shipyard business. I would hope that the council and the staff would negotiate these leases that they're talking about with the certain marinas, because I've seen through just us managing the Balboa Yacht Basin with the rent increases of quite a few tenants leaving and going to other marinas, other towns, other cities. The people that affect this are not only just the shipyards, but it's also the kid that washes a boat, the canvas guy in Costa Mesa. There's a lot of families that are affected. The rent increases have pushed a lot of people out of our town. And I would hope that the committee and the council would talk to these marina owners and negotiate some fair settlement market value, or not market value, but a settlement that they could talk about. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Good evening. My name is Jack Hohottle. I've lived in Newport for 40-some years now. We started, 20 years ago, we started a small boat rental business with 8 boats. We now have 48 boats, including a very successful parasail boat this summer. This enormous fee increase proposed, in most cases, will be paid by tenants like us in the marine business, small businesses. When we rent several slips from our 2 different landlords. When these landlords get their permit fee bill every year, they just give it to us, and we have to pay it. So this increase, even though we don't own the slips or anything, it goes down to the small businesses that are working within these slips. Our records show that over the last 10 years, these permit fees have increased about 30%. I pulled the records last night. So they have been going up. These permit fees are in addition to our monthly dock rents, of course. All business people here tonight know that in America we proudly function on a market-driven economy. Balboa Boat Rentals is no exception. Our best year was 2008. Like many other businesses, it is off almost 20% from 2008. And last year we paid federal income tax on a profit of only 3.5% of our income. You might suggest, well, just raise your fees. Well, we've tried to do that. We're at a point where when we try to raise the fees, the people walk away from our rental business. %70 of our customers are walk-up people from out of the area. They come across on the Balboa Ferry, get off, see the rental boats, walk over and rent. The demographics of these people are quite different than what we're used to in our community. So they're very effective if you try to raise your rents. In summary, for a typical small business person, the rates proposed look like an unreasonable attempted money grab by our city to be used for other purposes, as other speakers have mentioned. It is now time, I think, for the principals in this matter, including the city, to sit down across from one another and discuss this, because there's so many other factors involved than just raising the rents.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, please. And we're through. I'm going to close it. Please, keep moving.
Bob McCaffrey, local person. I hope this city council thinks long and hard about all the people who spoke in favor of this.
Thank you.
Good evening. Jim Parker, Port Calypso Marina and Marina Properties. I've been in business here in the harbor for approximately 32 years. And much of what I had to say tonight has been expressed very, very well by some of my associates in the audience. And I come here with a heavy heart as I face the realization that the city seems to be more interested in taking money from us that they don't urgently need than they do about the health and welfare of the marine businesses and business owners that are an essential part of the Tidelands and are the part of the lifeblood and the history of this beautiful harbor. And I'm disturbed about where we are with the 20% and all the rest of it. But I'm also disturbed at how we seem to have arrived at this point. And now that I'm down to 3 minutes, I better hurry up. On March 13th of this year, the council initiated this public debate, the first time I became aware of it, on the Tidelands issue, and they came out with a $1.20 per square foot and 20% of gross revenue generated by the Tidelands versus the 36 cents we're paying now for the permits. Next was a modification following shortly thereafter, and there were several changes in the terms, as the city manager has pointed out, but the proposed fee structure was not among them. We're still at $1.20 or 20%, just as we were in March. Next was there were many meetings between city officials and certain stakeholders, with compromise proposals being presented to the city by some of these stakeholders. And again, these, what I'll have to say, so-called negotiations resulted in no change in the city's March 13th fee. We're still back there, and the position in this fee and position and much frustration, of course, by marina owners who find that there are arguments and proposals seem to be falling on deaf ears. At least that's what the perspective is from here. We have two appraisals that have been mentioned, and their results have been mentioned. And Mr. Rasmussen, with $1.50 square feet for the larger marinas and $1.40 for the smaller, with 17%. And now we're here tonight looking at a city proposal that has finally changed, but sadly only because the Netzer appraisal opened a door to a higher fee structure of $1.45 and 20% instead of the $1.20 we've been hearing at that point.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's a quick 3 minutes.
It is. Is there any other public comment?
My name is Brad Avery, and I've been close enough to the situation to know that there's no one on this council that's trying to put anyone out of business. And I know that the intentions are good all around for everyone in this room. I also know that it's unfortunate that nothing was done for a long, long time to deal with this issue by past councils on getting these rates where they should be, and that the rates are at market now, and it's really difficult for any business to take this on. And the only thing I can suggest is to please consider spreading this out on a much longer path, particularly given what's going on in the economy today and what I know of what the marine businesses are going through. I think it's just way too short a period of time for these businesses to absorb this hit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gary Pickett, and this speech tonight is being brought to you by Marshall Duffield's eyeglasses, as I broke mine on the way here. And interestingly enough, everybody looks a little taller and thinner. I'm taking some of Gary McKittrick's 15 minutes. On February 23, 2012, the City of Newport Beach invited the 15 largest marina owners and operators and informed them that the city would raise TIDELANDS fees to the greater of $1.20 per square foot or 20% of revenue. Today, I am here before you on behalf of many of those 15, as well as many other smaller owners and operators. On the 23rd, as a CPA that practiced for 21 years and had just recently sold my practice, I knew this was just the beginning of a negotiation, because I knew no business could withstand an elimination of 20% of their gross revenue and sustain their business. I knew that there were 2 clients in that room that have been harbor fixtures for many decades, and my knowledge of their businesses told me that they could not continue on a long-term basis under the ad hoc committee's proposal. I also know of the profound impact of the committee's proposal on our business at Ardell. After the 23rd, it was probably very early in the morning on the 24th, I reviewed the Coastal Land Use Plan, which states the policy is to protect and encourage facilities that serve marine-related businesses. The policy is to support marine use. That gave me a sense that in the end, the city would relent eventually. And as proven by the city manager's proposal, I'm wrong.
All right. Gary, let me interrupt you for just a sec. You said you're taking part of the 15 minutes?
Yes.
So if we just start 15 minutes now and we'll stop it when you're through and then run it on, is that fine?
Great.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. The city hired appraisers, one of which, Mr. Gary Rasmussen, stated fair market rental rates are 17% of revenue or $1.50 per square foot. He didn't say the greater of. The city has said that. Mr. Rasmussen, in his report, used an extraordinary assumption that the city's tidal and water is valuable because of the uplands. He indicates that before a marina owner bought and improved the land, built a seawall, docks, guardrails, restrooms, and offices, that Tidelands water wasn't worth that much. You can find it in Mr. Rasmussen's report. He states, without the land, the Tidelands water is not worth much. Upon careful review, you will find that the appraisals are flawed. Mr. Rasmussen is correct in many instances, but incorrect in others. He uses a 97% occupancy at a time that we haven't seen those occupancy rates in years. He also uses a land value of $185 per square foot, whereas Mr. Netzer, the other appraiser, uses a value that's 48% higher, or $275 a foot. If you use Mr. Netzer's $275 and put it into Mr. Rasmussen's calculation, his fair rent, Rasmussen's fair rent, declines by 76 cents a square foot, more than half of his stated fair market value. Furthermore, if you substitute Mr. Rasmussen's 3% vacancy with a realistic 6%, his conclusion goes down another 11 cents. But most importantly, the 2 appraisals rely heavily on bayshores and swales leases that were nothing more than renewals, and Mr. Rasmussen states there was little room for negotiation. These leases fail the requirements of the definition of market rent. which Rasmussen himself says on page 2 of his report, requires a competitive and open market. The Bay Shores leases and the Swales leases were a take-it-or-leave-it deal, which I'm becoming more and more familiar with. George Jones details the histories of these leases, as well as the Bahia Corinthian, on pages 54 through 57 of his April 31st, 2012 appraisal report. The report states that these leases did not represent open market transactions where each party was acting prudently and knowledgeably, and that the price was unaffected by undue stimulus. With regard to the Bay Shores Marina lease, Mr. Jones reports, this lease agreement is an outgrowth of an original lease entered into 1974 by the County of Orange and the Irvine Company. George Hamilton Jones himself states that he had personal knowledge regarding the terms of the original lease. In that agreement, rental value was based upon a formula back in 1974, expressed as a percentage that would be adjusted to account for the increasing upland values. It's been reported to this office, George Jones's office, that there was confusion in implementing these adjustments, and as a consequence, by failing to make the appropriate adjustments for increases in land value, the inflationary adjustments from 1974 became effective in a gross rental income over time of 20%. There was no basis in independent analysis or reference to market evidence. George Jones's interviews involved parties indicated that when the new 2004 lease was entered, no independent appraisal was performed to establish market rent, and the prevailing rate of 20% was just simply continued. The Swales lease was originally leased by the County of Orange to the Falwell family, which was leasing the uplands from the Irvine Company in '71. Shortly prior to the reevaluation in '91, the lessee had made substantial investment in upgrading marina improvements. When the county raised the percentage rate to 20, poor Mr. Falwell actively challenged the level of rent. However, there was no established forum or court for seeking adjudication by any third-party entity. Legal counsel was employed by Mr. Falwell in order to seek hearing in which an independent opinion of market rent would be presented. But these efforts went up to the level of the County Board of Supervisors, and they refused to review the matter. In essence, the 1991 revaluation, which set the rent at 20% of the gross income, is not considered to have a willing lessee, nor was it, in our judgment, reflective of an open and competitive market. Mr. Jones also comments about the Bahia Corinthian Yacht Club lease, which he did consider an open market transaction because it was new. It was negotiated by Bahia Corinthian and the city of Newport Beach, and the Bahia Corinthian Yacht Club is paying 9% of gross slip rent. But what's a mystery to me is that if Rasmussen states fair market value at 17% of revenue, why is the city using 20%? Please remember the coastal land use plan policy is to support marine use, to protect and encourage facilities that serve marine-related businesses. Mr. Rasmussen, who is from San Diego, was kind enough to visit our marina. Prior to visiting, he asked, "Where is Ardell? Can you give me directions?" Now, I've never claimed to be brilliant, but I'm somewhat blessed with a good degree of common sense, and I asked myself, why is the city using an appraiser who knows so little about Newport Harbor when right among us is an icon in the appraisal industry that has lived here his entire life in Newport Beach? George Jones did an incredible analysis in 2001 that the city didn't use, and George has done another survey stating market rent should be 9.5% of gross revenue or $1.20 per square foot. He didn't say the greater of, and neither did Mr. Rasmussen. Since February, we've offered 3 separate alternative proposals to the city, each one of them a greater compromise by the marina operators and owners, as we've increased the ante each time. Each proposal has been dismissed by the city, despite our commitment to pay a higher Tidelands fee. We understand the harbor is in need of improvements and dredging. It's just that so little of our Tidelands fee is going to that. Each year we've paid the permit fee charged by the city, yet somehow I sense the ad hoc committee views us as adversaries and not partners in implementing the coastal land use plan. In addition to paying our permit fee, we've maintained our facilities and provided a marine service with the brokerage of yachts. We haven't increased our slip rents in 4 years given the difficult economy and the continued movement of local boats to Long Beach, Dana Point, and San Pedro. Simply go to those marinas and notice how many boat transoms indicate the home port of Newport Beach. I'm going to be frank at the risk of being blunt. We are stuck in the city of Newport Beach's monopoly. We have no choice. We have a lot invested in our uplands and our marinas. We will have to pay what you vote for tonight. This is clearly not fair market rent, as there is only one landlord, the city, and one landlocked tenant, the marina operator. You have us over a barrel, as there's no competitive market, there's no room for negotiation, and certainly no support, no protection, and no encouragement for marine-related facilities. You are increasing the Tidelands fee to 20% of gross revenues, not because it is fair, but because you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You have restrained yourself very well, I must say.
Mayor, Council, it'll probably help. I made a copy of what I'm going to say, actually, so at least you'll have some notes. My name's Gary McKitterick. I appreciate the time and hope that Mr. Pickett and his articulation saved me a couple minutes. What I'd like to say is thank you. This is not an easy task for the City Council, the staff, or certainly the residents. Let's start with what we agree with. We agree with the conclusion that the fair market rent for the public Tidelands should be charged. It's a great resource that we have in the harbor. So why is there a controversy at all? Let me boil it down to a few points. These are going to be at least technical so that you in your evaluation, as you listen to the staff, please evaluate these points. First, there is no competitive and open market in the Newport Harbor with respect to Tidelands. Gary said it, I'll repeat it. There's a single landlord and a single tenant. This is a bilateral monopoly. George Jones discusses it, and I'd refer you to those pages and have staff review it. The tenants can't make decisions because there is no market information. So what's the impact? The current permittee and the tenants then are compelled to take the rent even if it's in excess of fair market value because they've invested in the uplands. They built the docks. They built the parking. They provided the utilities. This action to compel is very harmful to the marina owners, particularly the small marina owners. Step back, please, and understand that. The water parcel is what we're valuing, second and most importantly. Remember, as somebody said, it's the footprint of the water. I think Mr. Hinn did. We agree. The water parcel is severely restricted because it has no access to the uplands. Newport Harbor is unique. We've talked about it. We talked about it in staff meetings. it impacts the appraisal analysis. So what's the next issue? Rasmussen and Netzer, they've posted for review appraisals. I've submitted a letter on August 30th, which provided comments on those appraisals. I won't go through those because I think they're in detail. I would hope that the council does review them with careful eye. Next issues, why are we here? Although the commercial owners and two highly qualified experts opine that we believe that the committee's numbers that sit up there are well in excess of fair market value, there's no recourse available. We can ask, we can plead, but there is no recourse. Given the substantial investment of the marina operators, the marina owners are being compelled to pay rent, which we think is in excess. There is a solution, which is a good thing. The city has the ability to weigh factors. The appraisal should be one of them. What we would encourage you that there is a validation and evaluation methodology which you can use in a closed market, which this is. My clients have submitted proposals, and others have submitted an appraisal by George Hamilton Jones. I ask you to use a special lens when you review facts with the circumstances that are unique in Newport Harbor. George Jones says in his appraisal that only 10% of all the marine properties in Southern California have the characteristic that Newport has, and most of them are in Newport. We can't look too much outside. I'm going to point to you, and you've looked at your the outline there. Let's get to a point on the market, because this is important to understand. There is no open market. There's only one landlord. So what does that mean? What's a bilateral monopoly result in? Because this means the definition of fair market value cannot be satisfied. There is not a willing seller and a willing buyer. There is not a willing landlord and a willing tenant. A critical component which you need to evaluate is when you determine the information, you have to rely, and when you're relying on an opinion of value, you have to understand, is there an open discussion? There's not. It's closed. In particular, it's essential to confirm that a buyer and seller, in this case a landlord and tenant, were each acting prudently and with free will. The test fails. A thorough analysis of the special issues in the market are essential to confirm and conform value to this harbor to these factual situations. It has not been done. The water parcel. It stands alone.
How much longer?
4 minutes. 3 minutes? Is that okay?
All right.
The Newport Harbor uplands, as been discussed by many of these people, are owned. Their sweat, their money, their investment, that improved them. It provides parking, it provides utilities. And in many cases, there's, and I want to show a picture of the Ardell Marina because it's very similar to many properties in the harbor. You've got this in your appraisals. Not only are the private uplands owned and therefore no access, there's private water that separates those uplands from the public tidelands. So if this were a fair market, this were a green field, what would the transaction look like? It would say, how can I release my water as a standalone parcel? That would mean a mooring. You cannot access that property through the uplands without their consent. The analysis under the appraisals, although we requested that analysis be done, it was not done. We requested that in order to determine fair market value of a water parcel only, you needed to look at it without access. Mr. Rasmussen, who we believe to be a very good appraiser, said that the reason he didn't do it is because he made an extraordinary assumption. That's not adequate. You're charging these people 400%, or proposing, in excess of what they're doing today, without doing a proper analysis of a standalone water parcel. You should never do that in your position, even if you can. The appraisals have problems. We've pointed them out. But you know what? All appraisers are going to have problems. So let's look at your history real quick. 1989, you did one. George Hamilton Jones. 2001, you did an appraisal. George Hamilton Jones. What's important is not the name. The importance is that he recognized the unique nature of Newport Harbor. He recognized that you need to apply facts that are different than normal appraisals. The city's changed methodologies, and therefore numbers have changed. Look deeply at the critical issues on the 20%. I'm going to end pretty much with this. The city has relied heavily, and I've been in the discussions with the committee, and so I have personal knowledge of this, and with staff. And they say, how can we charge less than what the county charges in our harbor? There's a very simple reason. That wasn't an open competitive transaction. George Jones hits it on the head. In fact, he has personal knowledge of why there's mathematical errors in one of them. There is no fair market determination. So what do? You can't use a compelled transaction as a comparable to then say, guess what? Look at the number. It's high. It's not appropriate. What you did do properly as a city, probably prior to all of you, is in 1989, Bahia Corinthian was a proposal which was done by an appraisal. Here's my conclusion.
All right.
Work with the harbor. They're good people. They appreciate the government. What they don't appreciate is to be dictated when they believe fairly and in their opinion that these appraisals have challenges. Look at my letter, read it. Don't vote unless you read the detail, because the detail matters in this. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you. All right, I'll bring it back to council. Is there any more public comment? All right, I'll bring it back to council.
Madam Mayor?
Councilman Selich?
Yes, I'd like to start off for the committee here. When this committee was formed, our charge was to come up with what a fair rental charge is for the land in the harbor, in the Tidelands, and how to phase it in. The situation became apparent to us early on that this is something that had not been done in many years. Our research went back to the mid-'60s. We've looked at all the various appraisals and theories and things that have been brought forth over that period of time. Many of them were shelved, never acted upon for various reasons. In a few instances, the adjustments were made, but they were extremely compromised for one reason or another. So our charge was very difficult because we had a situation that was way out of balance, that the fair market rent was not being charged, and we knew after we got into this that there was going to be this huge gap of what the fair market rent should be. In looking at it, in our analysis, that going to a percentage rent basis was the fairest way to deal with all the users in the harbor, because it would flow up and down and automatically adjust with changes in economic conditions. In down times as we have now, the rent charges would go down. In good times, the rent charges would go up. It's a self-leveling mechanism that would be done. Then our other charge was how to phase it in. We knew that the increase was going to be so great that we had to come in with some kind of a phase-in program. We had many of our meetings with the harbor users. I have met and talked with many of you on this over the last 9 months or so, and I have continually said, tell us how we can best phase this in. We have to get to market value. We don't want to hurt your businesses. We want to come up with a reasonable way to phase this in. We're not out to kill the businesses in the harbor. So we arrived at 20%. Well, how did we arrive at 20%? Several of the speakers pointed out that appraisals are one method of arriving at it, but we have flexibility in using other factors and other information that we develop to arrive at what a fair rent is. The appraisal information that you have seen, as well as research that we have done on our own, indicate that most marinas and other jurisdictions use a 25% of gross revenue where the water and land are jointly leased. And this is confirmed in our harbor by the dunes. The dunes is at 25%. It's water and land area all on tidelands, 25%. We also know that we have the two marinas, the Bay Shores Marina and used to be called the Swales Marina, that are at 20% of gross revenue on leases from the county. There's been testimony tonight that those are not arm's length open market transactions. We disagree with that. We don't believe that's the case. Those leases were negotiated on different bases. A lot of factors went into consideration. Those owners freely and openly agreed to that 20% of gross revenue and are operating just fine. We also wanted to gut check that 20%. So we took a look at where tidelands and uplands are separate, that the primary upland support that's required is parking. That's primarily what the upland support is. Many of the upland parcels in the city have other uses that are providing revenue to the landowner. But the parking is the part of the equation that has to be provided for the tidelands. Well, our parking requirement is 3/4 of a parking space for every slip. The typical parking space takes 350 square feet, so that means for every slip you need about 263 square feet of land area to support that slip. This all suggests that the 5% rent reduction as suggested in the appraisals is appropriate to get us to a 20% factor where the tidelands is separate from the uplands. And as an aside, I want to point out that the harbor continues to move towards harbor slips, or larger slips is what we are doing, that the amount of upland support decreases. If you go from 20 slips to 15 slips because you're reconfiguring for larger boats, then your upland support decreases, and the trend has certainly been over the years to go to larger boats and larger slips in this harbor. Also, I think it's important to point out that many harbor users have no upland support at all, and they in fact burden our streets with their parking needs because they're not providing it on their parking, and that suggests they should probably pay a higher rate than 20%. And looking at the spread of existing leases in harbors, and Dave, can you flash up that's the comparing rents slide in your presentation there? Yes, thank you. So what that shows is we've got a spread of leases in the harbor, different situations, obviously. Some the tidelands is joined to the uplands and some not, where we go from 9% to 40%. If you take a look at that spread and just take a look at it, 20% lands just right about in the middle, which was another check we used to see if our rationale was being fair. Now, we've heard a lot of facts and figures thrown around here tonight, and that's kind of what you do when you get into these negotiations and trying to come up with what the rent should be, but we're trying to come up with the average rent that we should be charging in this harbor. And so when you go through and do all of these checks, it seems to be fair. I also want to point out that 20% does not mean 20% of the total revenue of a marina. A lot of these marinas are different. Mr. McKitterick or Pickett, I can't remember which one, was pointing out the Ardell situation. Well, the Ardell situation, I'm guessing about 20 to 25% of their area is not chargeable under this because it's not tidelands. So we're only proposing that we get 20% off the tidelands portion, so their entire marina doesn't go up 20%, as was indicated in the presentation. It goes up a smaller percentage. And if anyone would take a look at the tidelands permits in the harbor, almost all of the permits have a significant portion of the marina area that they have is being uplands. Goes from probably a low of 10% up to a high. I looked at one marina that was about 50%. I want to point out one thing that disturbs me. There was an email going around indicating, and there's testimony tonight indicating that this committee has taken a take it or leave it attitude, that proposals were made and we rejected them out of hand. And that's not true. We have continually tried to work back and forth on this, tried to work with all of the harbor users in this situation. And I just want to point out that over Labor Day weekend, Councilman Henn was in Chicago, Councilman Rosansky was in Hawaii, I was over in Catalina, and we were negotiating, trying to put together a proposal that would be some type of compromise proposal. So we were working on that, and we were trying to do something, but we unfortunately could not come to terms on it. So trying to work with you is not rejecting and not trying to work with you when we're actually trying to come up with some kind of a compromise. Although we feel that 20% is the fairest to all marina operators, I think that the committee is prepared to offer, and this is what we were talking about over Labor Day weekend, offer a alternative where we take a 20% rate, convert it to a square footage formula, and create a self-adjusting mechanism based on a basket of marinas in the harbor and come up with a typical rent that can be used to determine the 20%, and using that as the basis rather than getting into a percentage rent off of each user. There seems to be a lot of concern over that. I think the two other committee members feel that the 20% percentage rent is the fairest to all users, but I think that we're open to offering that as an alternative. And I'd like to turn it over to Councilman Henn, and he's going to explain how that would work.
Yeah, Dave, can you put that index example up there for me? You know, I too, no, not that. There you go. This is a little hard to see. Yeah, let's. No, the audience. Let's start over again, okay?
Would the new city hall work better?
These switches are just simply not there. No, we'll do the best we can. Can you make it bigger, Dave? Can you expand the size of that image? Yeah, I can try. Give me a second. No, it's still going to be small. All right, well, that's as good as we can do. How fast can we get a bunch of copies of this? I mean, council members at least need to be able to look at it. I imagine there are some people in the audience that'd like to be able to see it too.
You want to continue to try the lights, though? I mean, we have been able to make them work.
The switches aren't even, they won't turn off these lights for some reason.
Your copy is.
Chris got him to work with that automatic clicker earlier.
Good circuit breaker. I wonder why we need a new city hall.
Yeah.
Huh? I know.
Well, that's
I want to make
better.
sure it gets in the mic too.
How long is the cord?
Is that a little better?
There we go, yay!
Hey, how did we do that? Thank you, Councilmember. Okay, thank you, Councilmember Rosansky. All right. We are going to get copies, and, but I think we can muddle through this adequately for now, I hope. Okay. Steady as she goes.
I'm steady.
All right. So, to the point of working with the harbor community, we've had a lot of conversation. Councilmember Selich made the remark about what we were doing over the weekend from 3 different cities trying to make this thing work with the harbor marina operators. And the concept that was at the heart of those discussions was a concept of constructing an index and using a calculation based on that index to increase the harbor rents and thereby avoid having to access private information from the marina operators, in other words, getting their gross revenue numbers. We got a lot of feedback along the way that we don't want the city in our business. The city shouldn't be in our business. We don't want to have to disclose private information to the city, such as our revenues. We still think that percent of revenue is the better way to go. We collect TOT tax every day of the week from all the hotels here in this city. They don't seem to mind disclosing their revenues. Private, retail tenants in shopping centers all over this world pay percentage rent. They don't seem to mind disclosing revenue. But nevertheless, if there's a big issue about disclosing revenue, this is a way to avoid that and still get to an answer that the committee believes works. So we're trying to reach a compromise here and take out of the picture this objection to disclosing revenue and being in the marina operator's business. So how do we go about that? Well, we've selected 7 marinas. A number of these were in some of the discussions that we had with the marina operators. We think these marinas are generally representative of what's going on in the harbor. There are some big boat marinas, there's some small boat marinas, different spots in the harbor, different owners. I'll just tick them off just so everybody knows. That's Ardell, Bay Shores, that's the Irvine Company. That's the county lease with the Irvine Company. Bayside Marina, that's Irvine Company, CalRec. The Kirchie Group, that's Lido Peninsula and all the marinas around that. The Harbor Towers Marina, which is that's a city and county lease. The Newport Dunes, that's county, and then the Newport Marina, formerly called Swales. So it's a variety of marina sizes, and what we have done is calculate the gross annual rents associated with each of those marinas. Now, in some cases, that calculation is an estimate, and where over here it says index, that's where we've done our best to calculate, based on the information available to us, what the gross annual revenue of that marina might be. And what we've done is take the State Land Commission annual survey, which estimates marina revenue using average slip size, average rent per lineal foot, and calculate for the 3 marinas where it says index, we've calculated what we think is a reasonable estimate of the gross revenue. Now, we also reduce that by a 5% vacancy factor. Is that not right? Now, there's a lot of discussion about what's the appropriate vacancy factor. Some people say, well, it's more like 10%, maybe more in today's market. On the other hand, I'm pretty sure this harbor went years and years and years at 100% of occupancy, or darn close to it, for most, if not all, marinas. And so what you really need to do, and what an appraiser would do, as the appraisers have done, is take a stabilized occupancy factor. We selected 5%. One of the appraisers selected 3%. We selected 5%. So we calculated this annual revenue, applied a vacancy factor, came to an estimate of revenue. Now, that's for the indexes. For the other 4 here, the revenue is known, because those marinas report one way or another to a public entity. We know what the annual revenue is.
We don't have to apply a vacancy factor because it's the actual revenue, and it reflects whatever vacancy was in place. So we now have 4 out of the 7 where we know the gross revenue, and if we take that gross revenue times 20%, we get and then divide it by the square footage in the marina, we can get a per square foot calculation for each marina. And in many cases, the square footage is exactly known. In a few cases, we had to estimate it using GIS with our GIS department in the city, and we can get fairly good with that, calculating a perimeter of the marinas and calculating the square feet. So on at least 4 out of 7 of these, and arguably on the other 3, it's a pretty darn good estimate of what the rent per square foot was for 2011. And then what we do is we add up all the revenue, we add up all the square feet, and we divide, we add up all the revenue, we take that times 20%, we divide that by all the square feet, and we get what you would say is a weighted average revenue per square foot, or rent per square foot based upon a 20% of revenue charge. And it's $2, it's hard to read, it's $2.52. Way less than some of them at the top of this calculation, more than some at the bottom, but it represents, I think, generally a good composite of the harbor based upon the selection of these marinas. Now, of course, we can argue about that. We actually have not discussed this with the rest of council until just now, although they are aware that this concept has been supposed, if you will, over the last week or so, and it was mentioned in the staff report for tonight's meeting. Our view is that this, if going to a percent of revenue is such a problem, this is a reasonable way to get to a fair market per square foot charge that avoids that problem. It takes us out of people's businesses and still yields an answer that we think is a reasonable answer in terms of fair market value, and one actually that is rather easily administered. We know what the square footage is, we just do a multiplication, that's the answer. Now, $2.52 is a lot more money than 36 cents. There's no question about that. This is a big change. I've been in business for a long time. I understand that. I understand how disruptive that is. So does everybody up here on this dais. And so we understand that we need to implement a change of that magnitude slowly and carefully to give people a chance to adjust their business models and their businesses to this over a longer period of time. There's lots of ways to adjust. And so the idea here is to bring this into to the end game, if you will, here, the end number of $2.52 over a period of time. And we've thought about that, too, in view of the size of that change, and we're prepared to further compromise on the phase-in of this change. And so, Dave, if you can put up the next slide.
You have the clicker.
I do? Which one do I click?
Left or the right, you'll get to it.
It doesn't seem to be working.
Got to aim it at the left.
Ah! Nope.
Can you take it, Aaron?
All right.
We are challenged.
Technology.
This.
Can't somebody manually advance it?
Put it backward. Look forward, the other way. There you go.
All right, there we go. So, in view of the magnitude of this change and the switch to a per square foot, which, as Ed pointed out, is, although we would adjust this on a regular basis, it's still less responsive than a percentage of revenue to changes in the market, but still, it is responsive. We start out at 36 cents. That's where we are right now. On March the 1st of 2013, we'd go to 72 cents, and then $1.08, et cetera, thusly spreading that difference between 36 cents and $2.52 over 6 annual steps, such that in 2018, we would arrive at $2.52. Now, I want to make something really clear. This is a pro forma illustrative example, because what we would do is recalculate the index each year. And I don't know if next year the index would say that the target terminal adjustment is $2.52. It might be $2.40. Could be $2.60. We don't know. So we take the new target calculation based upon the index, and we take the number of years remaining, and let's say this happens at the end of the 72 cents, and the new target is $2.62. We take the difference between 260 and 72, and we just phase that in then over the remaining annual time period, such that by the end of 6 steps, this would yield a calculation that would bring the marinas to a market, what we believe is the appropriate fair market at the end of the process. So it's self-adjusting. It will involve, if there is a breakdown in rent in terms of soft market, et cetera, it will reflect that, because actually 4 out of the index components are based on actual rent, and thus we think this is a pretty reasonable approach to employ the committee's view of what fair market value is, to give effect to the harbor's concern about being in their business, and to spread it over the longest period of time of any of the harbor rent adjustments we've done so far. And so we think, we're trying to be as responsive as possible to this issue of responsibly managing this change, which none of us like. Nobody sitting up here likes this, but which is primarily a function of decades worth of inaction along the way. And I realize this is tough to take, but the marina operators also should ponder on the idea that if this had been done properly along the way, there would have been millions of dollars of less profit over the last 20 years or so that they did earn because of this inaction. So we're not asking, we don't think it's appropriate that that be clawed back, or in any way, we're not criticizing anyone. We're not criticizing anyone for having run their businesses to the best of their advantage by raising slip prices to what the market will bear. But what we do know is we need to correct this, and we're trying to correct it over as long a period as we think is reasonable to make it happen. Now, because this concept has just been detailed now, all here in front of you and in front of the rest of council, we think it would be appropriate, if council is desirous and wishes to accept in concept this approach, as opposed to a percent of revenue approach, that we come back at the next council meeting, if we can, where we would need to review the lease template and this index approach, because it would be embedded in the leases. So to give another opportunity then for the public and the rest of council to wrap their minds around this, and we'll have the benefit of public input and more discussion on this, the specifics of the index here, how it's constructed and calculated, and hopefully arrive at a conclusion at the next council meeting when we talk about the lease template and this.
All right, thank you. Before we do that, Mayor Pro Tem Curry, did you have something?
Just to clarify, Mike, your comment, we'd bring back the index and the makeup of the index.
Right.
But I think tonight we would like at least to get some action on the 20%.
Right. My understanding is what the subcommittee would like us to do tonight is not to figure out the numbers, but to figure out which of the two paths we'd like to take.
So it would be the committee's view, if on the one hand, council is comfortable going with a percentage of revenue and the long-term leases we've structured, then the committee's view is 20% and a long-term lease. If council's view is they prefer not to go the percent of revenue way, then the committee's recommendation is apply a 20% principle here to develop this target per square foot.
Right.
Using this index approach, this phase.
But leave what would be left for discussion is the makeup of the index, not the 20%, whether you took one path or the other. We firmly believe that 20% is the percentage.
Well, that is something that the council will have to decide.
Well, and that's what we'd like to decide tonight.
I thought we were saying.
I just want to be clear about that.
I thought you were saying that we weren't allowed to talk about the 20%.
No,
you can't. Well,
Thank
certainly
you.
you can talk about it. We just want to leave the decision of the makeup of the basket of marinas to the next meeting so that the group here can absorb it and comment on it. Maybe they feel other marinas are more appropriate or not appropriate. But the 20% is the key here.
Well, but even that is not set in concrete, because that is something that the council has not opined on yet.
I realize that. What I'm trying to say is we'd like to opine on that tonight.
All
and
right.
leave the other thing for the next meeting.
All right, well, you can make a motion to that effect as soon as Mayor Pro Tem Curry has had his say.
Well, thank you, Mayor Gardner. First of all, I just want to commend and thank the committee. There could not have been a more thankless job in city government than to be the three council people who had to address this issue for the past 6 months. And Mike and Ed and Steve took this on with diligence and with integrity and with dedication, and they took the barbs, and I think they worked extremely hard to bring something to the table. And I think the idea that Ed and Mike have just laid out here shows that they're very open to compromise and to thought in terms of how we put this deal together. The awkwardness of how we have to do business here is that we don't get the chance to interact with each other on all of these ideas, and they don't get the benefit of all of our thinking necessarily, nor do we get the opportunity to fully understand everything that goes into their thinking and putting these proposals together. As a result, we all sort of talk independently with people and reach our own conclusions on some of these issues. For me, the question has always been the test of, is it actually fair when you take this and apply it in real life? And what is going to be the impact on the businesses in our harbor? Because one of the elements of our fiscal sustainability plan is our support of our underlying local economy, because that's what keeps our property values high and what keeps things growing and high in Newport Beach. I guess the fundamental difference that I've had with my colleagues on this is I've never been wedded to the 20% number. I understand the basis for it, and I don't fault my colleagues whatsoever. I think they've got a very good rationale for getting to that point. But at the end of the day, it's a number, and it's only a number. And it's a number that's pretty high, frankly, in my opinion. Now, here's what's interesting, because the committee has laid out a proposal here on the table, and just as early as this afternoon, and I've had conversations with some of the stakeholders in the harbor who represent to me that this is where they are, that they have come up with a plan that rolls out fees through 2018. It gets to $2 in 2018. So we independently came to numbers that are very, very close. They're at $2.16 in 2017, and they're at $2 in 2018. Now, there is no implicit jump to 20% to go into the next year. I think that's the fundamental difference between where I think the stakeholders are and the people in the marina. This is still a healthy bump. It's a 500+% increase over these years. But it does get away, just as Mike's proposal here is doing, from the whole, well, maybe perhaps not as much as I am. This idea gets us away from the whole 20% concept, gets us out of auditing the books and all of that thing. And I do accept that. I think that's not something we need to do. So I think what we have here, colleagues, is options that are actually independently have come together relatively close. I think this works out to roughly an 18% option, more or less, when you get to looking at its equivalency, for addressing this issue in a way that I think the stakeholders have indicated to me they believe is more fundamentally fair, and I think would have a less adverse impact on the boating and harbor community. I think all of us are committed to the fact that this needs to be phased in, and I was very pleased to see, Mike, that you and Ed in your presentation there, that approach has been taken. I do not feel wedded to the 20% number. It's a number at the end of the day. So, I think we have two options here. This one that the stakeholders have suggested to me is one they can live with, that actually ends up in a relatively same position as the one that the committee has just now announced. So I would be supporting this alternative plan today, and maybe listen to my colleagues and see which way we want to go.
Well,
Councilman Henn?
Yeah, I would point out the committee's number under this methodology is $2.52. So the 2018 gap is really about a 50-cent a square foot gap. But there's another important difference, and that's that the committee's methodology calculates an equivalency of 20%. And so future year changes would go up or down each year based upon that derived 20% per square foot number.
I understand that.
That's a little different than I think your marina constituents.
It definitely is different.
Yeah.
Yes, so that is. Thank you, Mayor. So with the recommendation of the committee, then that number is fluid. It may be 252, but it may be 260 or maybe 210, versus the stakeholders' proposal is fixed. It's saying, okay, we can predict some certainty in our business because here's where these fees are going to this date.
All right. Before we go any further, I think one of the things we wanted to do was determine essentially the basic methodology, and we have the two paths. One is the one that the subcommittee is recommending. They feel that the 20%, the original proposal, is the best proposal, and then there is this alternative that they have presented, or a variation of it that we could explore further. So I think that's the first thing we need to do, is make that determination. Would someone like to phrase that in a motion?
Well, for purposes of allowing us to have something to talk about, I will move what I will call the stakeholders' alternative recommendation that scales from 75 cents a square foot in 2013 to $2 in 2018, and then it goes to, I think, just about the same basket of marinas for determining in the index in 2018 and beyond. It sort of sits for the 2018-22 period, adjusted for the differences in the increase in the Newport Harbor Marine Index, and then is adjusted every 5 years after that. It does include the lease option. It does not peg anything to 20%.
I'll second that motion.
All right. Is there discussion?
Well,
Councilman Rosansky.
I guess then I'll make an alternative motion, and my motion will be the committee's recommendation that whether we go with a straight percentage of gross or whether it's a percentage of the index, but that we adopt the committee's recommendation of 20%.
So you're saying don't make our decision between these two, but follow one of these two paths to consider.
One of the two paths, but 20% is the number.
Oh, is there a second to that?
20% is the number, whether it's percentage of gross or whether it's.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
All right. Then this is the alternative motion that whatever we do, we will have a 20% as the fixed number, our base number to work off of. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Councilman Hill.
Madam Chairman, I guess I would like to slice this a little bit differently.
Let's have a third motion.
I think that would be fourth.
I see three topics, if you will. One is the fee calculated, is the lease rate calculated on a percentage of gross revenue, or is it calculated on a square footage basis? And I am very supportive. I started out this exercise of saying that I was absolutely locked into a percentage of gross because of the opportunity for self-adjusting. But as I've looked at it and as I've listened, I agree completely that square footage, in my opinion, would be a better way to do that. And I think with the indexing, we still achieve the self-adjusting aspect of it. So I support the square footage basis. I think one of the things I heard this evening is one of the most important aspects of this will be the phase-in. And I think that for many, it will be, as Councilman Hinn said, an adjustment in the method of doing business. It will be a change in the operational procedures of some of these operations. And so I think that the phase-in is an absolute key. And so I will share with you my suggested phase-in, and I'll say that with my suggested phase-in, I would be comfortable with the 20% number. Based upon the current economy and what we're all struggling through, and the fact that we don't see the light at the end of that tunnel yet, I would suggest that 2013 and 2014, the rate remain at 36 cents. And that we then move through the adjustments that were projected of 72 cents, $1.08, $1.44, $1.80, $2.16, and $2.52, which would then put us at 20% fair market value in the year 2020. So that gives 2 years to recover from this economy, and then gives 5 years, I think, 6 years, to get to the fair market value, which we all agree we have a fiduciary responsibility to be at, whatever that number is. And I guess going backwards of what I said, I'm willing and supportive of the 20% with that kind of a phase-in.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Curry?
Can we hear maybe from Mr. McKittrick or Mr. Pickett if they have
Not
reaction
yet.
to that? Not yet?
Not
Okay,
yet.
well.
Councilman Rosansky?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be supportive at least. Well, to me, it seems that we're headed to the per square footage method of doing it. I can count heads here, and I can see that there's not 4 for doing that, for just a straight percentage of growth. So I'm going to, if I can, amend my motion to remove the percentage of growth and just focus on 20%, as Councilman Hill was talking about, 20% of the basket of marinas as our ultimate end goal here. And so then it really comes down to now deciding how is this going to be phased in. I think that's what we're down to here. I hadn't really thought about your suggestion of trying to keep the rates low, I guess, the next couple years. I am a little hesitant to push it out 2 years. I'd be willing to accept 1 year, I think, and then start phasing it in. And even if you wanted to leave it over the, and I'd want to hear from my council committee colleagues, I guess, but maybe consider putting it out to 2020 as a kind of a midway. But I think we need to get going on these increase. I mean, the rates are just so low, and they're absurdly low. In all our negotiations with the marina operators and all the meetings we've had, I really haven't heard anybody defend 36 cents as a current rate today. And no matter where they came from, I think everybody agrees that the rent has been held artificially low for way too long of a time. So, I guess to gain consensus here and maybe give a little breathing room for 1 year, 36 cents might make sense, but I don't know about the 2 years. So I'd like to hear from Ed and Mike as well.
Since I seconded your motion, I'll second your amendment. As I've always said, I think it's in how we get to the right number. And I think I'm with Steve on this, that 2 years is a little much. Councilman Hill, I think 1 year, and then spreading it out to 2020.
1 year, 6 months?
You're really cutting it.
Didn't I get the lights off for you? Come on, throw me a bone here.
And then spreading it out to 2020, because we've got an extended period that we can get to the right number. I think it's more important to get to the right number and have a self-adjusting mechanism in place to get there.
Councilwoman Daigle?
I did have a question. I think I believe the Balboa, the one by the Galley restaurant, that they're using the index. How has that worked?
The yacht basin
Yacht
uses,
basin.
the rates use an index of 5 or 7 marinas, and what we do is we take the increment and change, of change from year to year, and we then increase or lower the rates based on that change.
Okay, and has it, in practice, has it been working well for the
Well,
basin? I mean,
we're
feel
still
like
in I think, a step up here
transition.
with the yacht basin to bring them to market. I don't think we've hit the actual time where the index itself is fully factored in using the ups and downs of that rate.
Right, we're in the ramp-up phase. That was, I think, a 3-year phase-in.
I think we're out at the end of it,
Right.
but
We're almost
to
it'll
the end
start
of
to
it.
be used.
Refresh my memory, when we did the mooring fields and when we did our own anchorage, did we give them a year at the current rates? Or
I
did
don't
we go right
recall,
into?
giving a year at the current rate, but we gave a 5-year step up on the moorings and a 3-year on the yacht basin.
We phased it in, but we immediately went into increases.
Correct.
The first time after adoption, it had an increase.
Yes, all right. I'm not supportive of staying at 36 cents for a year. I mean, it seems to me that everybody has agreed that the rates are too low. And to have at least a moderate increase seems to me a good faith thing. And then to extend the period, though, I think that is more valuable over the long term, so that there is that gradual phase-in. But we have a motion on the floor that will be 1 year with no increase, doing an index with fixing the 20%.
Well, before we vote on that, I'd be curious to hear what you would propose.
What I would propose?
Yeah.
I would propose that we vote to take both of these, the stakeholders and ours, and spend the next 2 weeks talking to the people it affects and get some of their input, because I know they like theirs, but I'd like to get their reactions, which you may get some of it tonight. We can give them a moment to react to it, and come back in 2 weeks and make those decisions as far as the numbers and everything based on some of the input we get. But before, you want to vote first, or would you like to hear their initial reaction? Because I think you had wanted to hear them, Mayor Pro Tem Curry. Would you like to hear?
I'm a bit confused.
Well,
Probably the only one in the room that way, but
First, let me
what
respond.
are we talking about in timeline at this point?
Well, let me respond to what you said.
2 weeks.
For what,
I'm sorry.
It's okay, I'm stepping on you. I wanted to hear what you said, because I thought maybe I'd be willing to further amend my motion, but I haven't heard anything that you've said that I would want to change my motion and move forward with the vote right now. So I'll leave it to you to decide whether you want to entertain more comment or
No,
not.
that's, that was just Mayor Pro Tem Curry had said something, and if you don't care to hear them, that's fine.
I'd like to hear them.
All right. Do you want to, Mr. McKittrick or Mr. Pickett, any immediate reaction? Would you rather not react at such a short notice to some of the things that have been discussed in the last 20 minutes? Very briefly.
It's very difficult to compete with the Irvine Company. They're closer to the harbor entrance. They have inordinate amounts of money coming from other sources that makes their docks and marinas phenomenal, and as proven by these numbers here. I think we would have the marinas volunteer their gross revenue numbers to you, because the numbers indicated here are high for those that you do not know the actual numbers for. And in the back of the room, 20% is still a sticking point when Rasmussen uses 17, when George Jones uses 9.5. Other than that, I believe we would like to have some time to consider this, go through some numbers. I'm a CPA, to remind you, and we welcome the opportunity to discuss this further with the city.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. So we have an amended Councilman Henn.
Yeah, so I'd suggest that the motion that's on the table is a very generous approach on the part of the city in terms of the length of this phase-in. And in light of that, I remain convinced that 20% is the right number. Now, I am, though, very happy to hear you say that you might be willing to volunteer actual revenue numbers that these 3 marinas that we've estimated. I'd much prefer to have those actual revenue numbers in the calculation of this index. And if you're particularly sensitive about disclosing that information, there's probably a way that we can work it out to maintain that disclosure as confidential as possible. That comes at the risk of making the calculation more of a black box calculation than the general public might like, because you've got to have a certain amount of disclosure in order for people to understand how it was calculated. But if you were willing to have, for example, rather than send the city in to get that information, if you're willing to have your outside auditing firm on their letterhead give us your actual 2011 revenue number, and we'll work it out with the city attorney to see if we can do that in some sort of a confidential fashion. And if you're right, that alone will close the gap between what you were already willing to offer and the $2.50 that the city was at, and I would think would mitigate a lot your concern about 17% or 20% or whatever, because at the end of the day, we're getting to a number that's pretty darn close to what you were willing to put on the table. So where I'm at is, with that understanding, I'd like council to weigh in concept on what's in the motion here, and then instead of just sort of talking about it all, the next time we come together, it will be for the purpose of refining the index calculation, looking at the lease template, and hopefully arriving at a conclusion on the lease template. In other words, those 2 things that we said that we would want to do at the next council meeting.
Thank
you. So I'd prefer to go ahead now.
Yeah, I would as well. Just one follow-up to what you just said, Mike. And I would welcome the added information, because we are working a little bit in the dark as far as the several marinas here that we don't have actual numbers on. But you have to remember that if we're going to go down that path, it's not just this year that we're going to need those numbers. We need them every year, because the index is always going to be recalculated annually.
You'd have to
so
agree.
It's not just a one and done. The commitment would be, and it would have to be, I don't know how we would do that.
Well, it would be done through
or something.
Be done through the lease document,
Yeah.
where they would agree to disclose that for purposes of index calculation.
Right. Just so that everybody
All right.
understands,
Councilman-
that's what we would need.
Councilman Selich? All right. I will not be supporting the amended motion. I don't think we should have a year's moratorium on the raise, but I also don't believe in the 20% as a given number. So that's just, I've been out of step with everybody for the last 2 nights.
I would agree with that position. I also won't be supporting it, and
We're going to want to make sure the motion is very clear to everybody, so I'm going to... Yes,
clarify
Mr.
it one
Rosansky,
more time.
please.
Okay, the motion, I believe, that's on the table, is that we'll move to the 20% of the, I want to make sure I'm phrasing it properly, of the basket of marina index, and that the initial, next year, the initial year of this, of the new, going forward, will be at the 36 cents a square foot that we currently charge, and that the increase between the 36 cents and what the 20% of the marina index rate is will be phased in annually, equally annually, as a, well, let me make it even simpler. If we're talking about, what do we say, 8 years and 1 year, the first year is 1/7 every year. So the first year we'll have whatever 36 cents is plus 1/7 of the marine index, or the marine index less 36 cents times 1/7, and add that to the 36, and you get that. And next year it'll be 2/7 and 3/7 and 4/7, and by the time we get out to 2020, it'll be the full increase. That's the proposal that's on the table.
So what you're saying is, on March 1st, 2020, we will be at the target index calculation.
Correct. At 20% of the basket of marina index.
Councilman Curry?
Do you understand
I'm clear, yes.
You're clear
Thank
now?
you.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Curry?
Well, this is still the 20% plan with an extra couple of years tacked onto it, and if you tack enough years onto it, we can get to a number that everybody would be comfortable with, but I just don't know that this methodology is something that I like, and I personally don't buy into the 20% myself. That's why I will be voting no.
I also see it as still the 20% plan, and now there's another dimension. It's being weighted by the Irvine Company, which I think has been pointed out is very difficult to compete with. You know, they have other things they can be moving around. So, you know, for the person towards the bottom of the food chain, it's even more difficult to be having 20% of something weighted by them.
Well, you have you have Irvine Company in there, but you have other marinas that are significantly lower. So I think to the extent that there's high numbers, there are low numbers. We selected the basket, and we're willing to. I think that's what's going to be left to next meeting is to discuss how the basket is made up, what marinas will be in the basket.
I just can't help but to comment on these references to the Irvine Company as if because they have so much money, they're willing to just spend it foolishly. I would suggest to you that Donald Bren didn't become the wealthiest person by far in Orange County and maybe California by spending his money foolishly. I think they probably do a careful calculation of return on investment when they make an investment, and that they don't operate marinas that lose money just because they make more money elsewhere in their empire. I bet that their marina business is held to the same return on investment and accountability standards as their other businesses. So I'm pretty sure I have no doubt they're tough to compete against, but it's not because they just spend money foolishly.
Right. Ed and I have negotiated several agreements with them now, and I've never gotten the impression that they want to leave any dollars on the table.
Nor have I.
Yeah. So,
Councilwoman Daigle?
I think the point was more they're able to command really good rents because they've modernized their facilities. They have a modern configuration, and not everybody in the harbor has been able to invest to that extent. So I think it's more their ability to bring in strong revenues.
well, quite frankly, Leslie, you just put your finger on the whole problem, or a big problem as I perceive it in the harbor, and that is that the rents have been so low that for the marinas that have not upgraded and have not kept up and have not competed as the Irvine Company has, and clearly they do have a lot of money and they can compete well, but because we've kept the rent so low, there's been no incentive to upgrade. There's been no incentive for someone to go out there and reconfigure their docks or cater to what the market is today, because you don't really need to. We're giving you the water. You can make some money, or you can not make, or make more money. And so, again, I think. Excuse me, I've been.
All right. Thank
me.
you. Yes, go ahead, Councilman Rosansky.
So as I was saying, we with the phase-in period, we've given the marinas now a long-term opportunity to come up, compete, figure out what your plan is, implement your plan, and so that 8 years from now, which is a pretty long time to implement a plan, even the city can implement plans in 8 years, and we take a long time to do things here, to meet the challenge. And it is a challenge, I agree. I'm a business owner. I pay percentage rent where I have my business. I get it, I understand. No one wants to pay more than they have to. But I recognize that, in order to compete, in order to pay my rent, I have to keep up, I have to remodel my business, I have to, provide a good service. And that's how I pay my rent. And that's how I compete with the other people that want to rent my space. So with that, I'll just leave it at that, and I hope we can just go to a vote here.
No, our debate is continuing. Councilwoman Daigle.
I have a basic economic question, and that is if you raise somebody's rent and you increase the cost of their business, how does that then free up capital for them to invest in their infrastructure?
Okay, and Councilman Henn.
Well, Gary has been an accountant for a long time. I was chief financial officer of publicly held corporations, two of them A-rated, investment-grade Fortune 500 companies. And I can tell you, I can't remember a single circumstance in which I had a dramatic adverse surprise in my business where I got 8 years to adjust to it in my business. So I really do think this is a very generous time period. It's a big increase, yes it is, but it's a very generous time period to make the adjustment. The certainty of knowing what you're dealing with, and furthermore, the certainty of having a property right for the length of that lease in your marina, which is something you've never had, and that's part of what the fix we're in right now, right? Because it's been an annual permit. You have been at risk in operating your marinas for a long time for a change of circumstance like this that you couldn't predict. And we're providing now an 8-year phase-in period. So, I've said enough. I'm going to support the motion. So,
Are we ready to vote? All right, please vote.
With Mayor Pro Tem Curry, Mayor Gardner, and Councilmember Daigle voting no, the motion carries.
All right, thank you. We stand adjourned.
Mayor Gardner,
Yes.
may I make another
Councilman
comment?
Hem.
I do want to reiterate again that this decision is in relation to commercial marinas. We have probably 8 or 9 other classes of users in the harbor, and no one should assume that the template we've just, in concept, agreed upon will be applied to every other class of users in the harbor. We do have fuel docks and shipyards that are essential marine services. We really need to give careful thought to that in terms of the viability of the harbor. We have nonprofits. We have restaurants that sometimes rent out some of their docks on a long-term basis and sometimes preserve a certain number of docks just for visitors coming in and out of their restaurant. We have homeowner associations that do the same thing. We have yacht clubs that do the same thing. So we have a wide variety of users, and we're going to have to deal with each class of user past this one according to the individual circumstances of those users. And that's the challenge for this group. And we'll be up to that challenge and up to it soon.
Councilman Rosansky?
Yeah, and I'll just add that since we are going to be bringing this back next meeting for discussion of the basket of marinas, I would recommend that if you do have comments about that you get it into us early. Don't send it on the Monday night before the meeting, because none of us really have an opportunity to adequately absorb information the day before the meeting. So if you do have comments, you have 2 weeks till the next meeting. If you can get it in within the next week or so, we'd appreciate that.
Councilman Hill?
I was going to ask what the schedule was between now and our next meeting with respect to accepting, if so volunteered, the true gross rental on the marina portion of their business isolated, and then also the method. I mean, who do they send their suggested marinas into? How is that going to work?
Well, I would suggest that you forward that information to the city manager's office. If that's
clicker.
okay, Dave? Or
It's fine, yeah.
Would you
I'll
have
show
Rob
my
do it?
information's on the last slide.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go to the last slide. Certainly, you can contact the city manager's office if you have information to provide. As far as I think what you were talking about, your first comment about the updated information on the rental income that they've offered, I mean, quite frankly, if we're going to keep the lease rate 36 cents for the first year, it's almost, we don't need it this week or next week. I mean, it's not, but I'd like them to walk away. I know that Mr. Pickett, right, offered it up, but certainly he only represents one of the 3 marinas here that we've kind of guesstimated what the rents are. I'd certainly want to hear from Mr. Kirchie's out in the audience, I see, and whatever. I'm sorry? The Irvine company, certainly, they may have something else to say about offering up their information. I don't know. I mean, it seemed like that was a big sticking point for a long time here, offering up information, and all of a sudden people are willing to offer up information, which is great. We've always sought to get the information. We'd rather do that than be in a vacuum. But I don't know that information is as critical for our next meeting as it is just the makeup of the basket of marinas.
Well, actually, I think it is important, Steve, because if it does result in a change in the index calculation that brings us closer to convergence from where the harbor community was, I think that is important.
I mean, it'd be nice to know the information, but I don't know that it's critical to making that decision.
Any more comments? Meeting is adjourned.